Welcome, my friend, to the On the Blue Line podcast with Wayne Mulder, and I am your host. And I'm so grateful that you found us. I hope you had a wonderful holiday season. And we are back to our normal The Interview Room, which is our show that releases on Thursday. This is probably going to be my shortest intro ever. If you've been listening to the morning roll calls up till now, which is our other podcast that releases on Mondays, then you are aware that I've got a lot going on, all good things, but this is not the only thing I do. I also work full-time in the career that I talk about. So for that reason, there's a few priorities that I have to deal with. And so the podcast is not taking second seat, but maybe not getting all the attention I wish I could give it. However, by the end of January, some of the new things that I've been talking about and teasing will be coming out, as my schedule will be freeing up a little bit to bring those to you. So I hope you're enjoying it. I really appreciate you listening. And just because I have to rush does not mean that this week's guest is not phenomenal and that there's a lot to be gotten out of today's podcast. So I sit down with Battalion Chief David Hollenbach, who's retired. During his 23-year career in the fire service, he was a firefighter, apparatus driver, pump operator, engineer, company officer, lieutenant, battalion chief in operations, chief of special operations, and a critical incident stress management peer counselor, which we do spend some time in this conversation talking about, as well as his battle, his journey with PTSD, and what he's doing since then. He is the author of Fireproof, Your Grand Strategy to Transforming Failure into Fuel for Your Future. He is an international best-selling author, motivational speaker, coach, and mentor. He owns and operates David Hollenbach Consulting, LLC, and hosts the popular podcast From Embers to Excellence. I really enjoyed sitting down with Dave. I thought we had a great conversation, and even though obviously his career was in the fire service, there was so much crossover that helps law enforcement officers and really everybody, no matter what your path or journey has been. So without taking any more time, here's this week's guest, David Hollenbach. Well, Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm glad we could finally make this happen. It's always a challenge getting schedules to come together.
Yeah, and we had a couple of hurricanes in there that delayed things as well.
That doesn't help for Floridians. Not at all. Well, let me start as I always do. My easy questions. Coffee or tea, sir?
Well, really depends on the time of day. We're in a southern state. Sweet tea in the afternoon is always good, and got to have coffee in the morning.
Now, are you from the South originally?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Orlando.
Okay. So, yeah, sweet tea would have to be on that list, I would say. Now, coming from Indiana, it's indifferent, Where's your favorite place to have that drink? As far as where's that peaceful place to have a sip of coffee in the morning, kind of relax and just kind of get ready for your day?
Out on the back patio. I live on a golf course that's been closed down for a while, so it's nice. Out behind the house, just got two fairways side by side, a lot of trees, big pond, and there's always ducks and like sandhill cranes and stuff walking around back there. So it's nice in the morning when you got that early morning dew and maybe even a little bit of fog rolling across there. So it's pretty relaxing, and it's a quiet neighborhood. So
absolutely. Yeah. And that large piece of property where the golf course used to be always becomes kind of like a nature preserve.
Yeah.
Why are there so many? What year did that one shut down? How many years ago? And the reason I ask is we've got like 3 golf courses around here that I can think of in residential communities that are no longer golf courses. They're just.
Yeah. I think golf courses are just so expensive to maintain, and this one shut down. It's funny. It was like 6 months after I moved into this house, it shut down.
No, are you a big golfer?
Not really, but I was I golf. Just I'm not that good, and I was like, I'll play more, and didn't happen.
Okay. Do you have a best or worst travel story?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have those. Yeah, my best, I gotta say, probably going to Europe. I had a nice trip where got to spend like 6 days in Rome, and then flew to Munich, spent like 5 days there, and then flew to Paris and spent 6 days there. And it was pretty freaking awesome. Yeah,
I'm sure.
Got to see a lot of cool stuff. Worst, and that probably, yeah, I probably won't go into that one.
Fair enough. That's pretty bad when it's so bad it can't make the cut. Now, the beautiful European vacation, was that pre-COVID, I'm hoping?
Oh yeah, yeah. That
Good.
was like back in, I want to say it was 2015, 2016. So like the Notre Dame Cathedral, that was still intact. That
Yeah,
fire
wow.
hadn't occurred, and just I really didn't know what to expect going there. I'd never been before, and I found everybody was. There's all those stereotypes, like how the French hate Americans. Out of the whole time that I was there was one person, and they were pretty insignificant. They were like a cashier in a museum gift shop, and apparently they had their opinions about Americans.
Right. It's funny you say that. I was listening to a radio host this summer. He went on a vacation, and obviously now we're post-COVID. The world is what it is. But he said the same thing. He said actually a lot of the people he interacted with, loved Americans, loved the fact that he was over there. And yeah, it was very interesting listening to, because it's not what you hear, right? You always hear the opposite.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I got just having dinner when I was like struggling to order something, because there are most people are polyglots. They'll speak 3 or 4 languages over there, and usually one of those languages is English. But then you have like the waiters and waitresses that may be from another European country, but might not speak English. So you'll have other patrons that hear you trying to speak, and they come over, "Oh, American, do you mind?" And then they're like excited about being able to speak English. And I got invited to this guy's mother's house for a real French meal, and I didn't
Awesome.
go. I didn't go, but I got invited, and there was like some expats from, I want to say it was Kenya, or I think it was Kenya. So they're it's like 6 Africans that were at this restaurant, and they'd been living in Paris for a while, and they were telling me like, "Oh no, in France you don't drink Grand Marnier," because I thought I was being fancy, get the after dinner drink Grand Marnier, and they're like, "Oh no, you don't here," and they just started ordering all these aperitifs so that I could try, and I could barely walk out of there.
That's
But
awesome.
just really friendly people, and it's kind of like a melting pot, somewhat like San Francisco or New York, or there's all these cultures that come together, and everybody was really amazing. I mean, I thought it was a beautiful city with a lot of really friendly people.
Very cool. Yeah, that is a great trip. Well, let me ask you the last of these type questions. What is your favorite modern nonfiction book, other than your own, of course, but other than yours, what is your favorite modern nonfiction book?
The one that I think was kept me engaged the entire time, and it's a pretty thick book, but it is so good. It's called The Warrior's Creed by Roger Sparks, and I interviewed Roger on my podcast, and I've met him. He's just this incredible human being. He lives in Alaska, and he's involved with this nonprofit called Force Blue. Force Blue is an organization that does coral reef restoration around the globe.
Interesting.
Their science divers are actually combat divers, like special ops guys from like the Navy SEALs, Marine Corps Force Recon, Green Berets. I mean, it's just like some really badass dudes that have PTSD, and they bring them together and do these missions, and it's pretty cathartic, and they're helping to restore coral reefs. And so Rudy Reyes and Roger Sparks are like the two main guys. Rudy Reyes and Roger Sparks were in the Marine Corps together, Force Recon guys. And Rudy Reyes is another guy that I interviewed. Rudy is the one that introduced me to Roger. Rudy played himself in the HBO miniseries Generation Kill, which follows this, Marine Corps Force Recon unit on the initial invasion of Iraq. And Rudy was there, and he was working as a subject matter expert on the show, and they didn't have anybody to play him, so they were like, "Hey, you want to?" He's like, "Yeah, I'll do it." So he plays himself. Yeah, and he's a really interesting character. I interviewed him, and then he introduced me to Roger. And before actually, he told me about Roger's book. So I got the book, and I was like, "Holy shit, man! I gotta talk to this guy." And Rudy was nice enough to introduce me. And Roger, when he left the Marine Corps, didn't like being a civilian. So I can't remember exactly. I think it was just like things slowed down too much for him.
Right.
So he went back into the military, but he decided, instead of being like, top of the food chain predator, predator killer guy, he joined the Air Force and became a PJ. So on the other side of things, where he was saving lives instead of taking them, and he ended up earning, being awarded the Silver Star for his actions over in Afghanistan as a PJ. And that's just like this incredible story where he was lowered down into this like really heavy firefight in the mountains of Afghanistan during Operation Bulldog Bite. And Roger's like 6'8", 6'9",
Wow.
like super tall guy.
Yeah.
And he's like running, grabbing bodies and pulling them back to where they had everybody gathered. And like there was dead guys that he was stacking up to block the gunfire from hitting the guys that were still alive. So he's doing like this emergency trauma procedures to just like stabilize these soldiers, get them behind this wall of bodies for some cover, and just hold off the enemy. And it's just him and one other PJ, and they wouldn't bring anybody else in because it was just so hot.
Right.
And it's just this incredible story. And he does such a great job with just the book, but he also he's the one talking in the audio version of the book as well. So it's just even just like this. I think, and let me give a warning about this. If you're going to listen to it, maybe do it on walks or runs or something, because like I was traveling back and forth to Panama City when I was listening to it, and I struggle with PTSD, and that's from my time in the fire service, and some of the stuff that he talks about like was really triggering, And like I ended up having to pull over on the side of the highway just to like get out some of the emotion, because
Yeah.
it really it's pretty intense. And he does a great job of really putting you there. And then like I said, he's just this incredible, like the stuff that he has seen and done and the life that he's led is incredible. And then to have him, like, he's such a humble dude, um, and does so much for the veteran community. And he's got a special needs son. Oz is his name. And if you buy his book from the Go Ruck website, those proceeds go into a trust for his son. So it's I don't
Yeah.
know. I just that book is one that the conversations that I've had surrounding that book, and the conversations that I've had with Roger, have clearly impacted me. So I always recommend that book if I find the opportunity.
Well, powerful. And I will link all that up for the listeners, and as they know, and I enjoy listening to the audibles, so I'll do the same and check that out when I am on walks and at the gym. Powerful, powerful stuff. So no, I definitely will look that up, and also link it up to the Go Ruck site so they can, so those proceeds for any books that they buy will go to him. So let's get a little bit into your story. You kind of mentioned it a little bit with the fire service. Let's move into your origin story. Something that maybe as a starting point that I find curious is, was it something you always, I know you mentioned growing up in Florida, is it something you always want to do, was go into the military or eventually some sort of service business like fire rescue, or what was kind of your path?
Yep. When I was born, my dad was still in the Navy. So he was in the Navy. My mom was a cashier in the Navy Exchange on the base in Orlando. It has since closed down, but it was a recruit training center and naval training center back then, and that's where the nuke school was. So any of those nuclear propulsion people, with the aircraft carriers and the submarines that are nuclear powered, they would go to school in Orlando. And that's not what my dad did. He was there he was part of a helicopter squadron, but they met in the Navy Exchange, got married, and had me. And my dad got out probably a year or two after I was born, and then he went into the fire service. And back then the fire department paid shit, even worse than they do now. Um, and so he worked a second job as a respiratory therapist in the hospital. And then my mom, she became a nurse, and I've just always been around this kind of service to others. And, I mean, the first fire truck I ever sat on, I was probably 3 years old, and it was the fire station like 2 blocks from the house I grew up in. And, it was a 2-story firehouse. So you had a fire pole on either side of the trucks and one to the rear of the trucks. And that was the first fire pole I ever slid down, was at that station. And, I grew up wanting to be a firefighter. And then, when I got older, like, me and my dad had our kind of falling out type of thing.
We all do.
And I was like, I'm never going to be a firefighter, and I'm going to be better than that. But then for some reason, that was what I aimed my rage at, was the fire service. But I still wanted to be in the Navy because, Top Gun and all that.
Well, of course.
And so I had aspirations of going into the Naval Academy and becoming a naval aviator, and I just didn't have the grades, so I enlisted.
Okay, different experience.
Yeah. And then when I was in high school, I just destroyed my right leg. Had multiple surgeries, had hardware in it, and they wouldn't take me initially until I re-injured it, and they removed the hardware. And as soon as I got those screws out, I was like, let's see if they'll take me now. and they did.
Wow.
I just had to sign some papers that basically, made it to where if I re-injured my leg, they wouldn't be held accountable or whatever.
Right.
And then I re-injured. I broke the same damn leg, and was medically discharged after like 14 months. So then that's when I was like, I guess I'll go do the fire department thing.
So always in Central Florida is where you were in the fire service at?
Yeah. Well, when I decided to go to the fire academy, I moved down south. So I was in Jupiter, Florida. So the northern end of Palm Beach County.
Mm-hmm.
Went to Indian River Community College for their fire academy, and became a volunteer for Martin County Fire Department. So there's Palm Beach County, Martin County, and then St. Lucie County. And it's at the north end of St. Lucie County where the fire academy was. So I was like 2 counties away, going to school, working in Palm Beach County and volunteering in Martin County. And that was, it was an okay experience. It's, Martin County back then was pretty sleepy, much larger elderly population. So most of the calls were medical or auto accidents caused by people that shouldn't have had a driver's license,
That's Florida. Yes.
And so that was, it was an okay deal, but I knew that they were hiring at the department that my dad retired from, or he had left. It's like the 4th largest fire department in the state of Florida. He had left and went to the state fire marshal's office. He was an arson investigator.
That's what I was going to ask. So he was working as an investigator?
Yeah, and a dog handler. So he had an accelerant sniffing dog.
Yep.
And he did some incredible things for the fire service and for law enforcement. And he was just always very humble. And it wasn't until he retired that I realized like how impactful his career was. After like going to his retirement luncheon and hearing all these people that had come from all over the country to like talk about him and roast him and, all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
But it was really cool. I talk a little bit about it in my book, Fireproof, just because, we all have these things that we're not very proud of. And for me, early on in my career, I was pretty jam up. I was a really aggressive firefighter. I loved what I was doing. But I feel like even back then I was starting to experience some indicators that I was dealing with PTSD. I mean, I saw some really horrific things very early on in my career, and it was in a compressed time frame. And I was like, man, I even asked after this one call where this 10-year-old girl got just drilled by a car. She was running across this roadway to get to the other side to go to her bus stop, and she was chasing her friends. Really, they made it across, and she was just a little bit heavier than her friends, and just got drilled. And when we and the station was like 2 blocks from where it happened. So we got there real quick. I was the first one off the truck. And when I looked at her, all the traffic was stopped and her shoes were like 50 yards away. And it looked like somebody had taken a machete to her leg. And it was dragging behind her. And, for those that are in law enforcement and fire, you've seen that look where it's that fight or flight response, and it's the animal in the victim that is trying to escape the predator that is attacking. And it's just that look of terror, and I've got to get away. And she was clawing her way in the roadway away from the car that hit her.
Yeah. And
so I had to stop her and package her up. And, they actually saved her leg, and she survived.
Wow.
But it was when we got back to the station, that I asked some questions, because I just had a dead baby the day before, and the shift before, had a 18-year-old on a motorcycle that, T-boned a plumbing truck because the plumbing truck didn't stop at a stop sign. And his head was split open like a melon. And his body was like a sack of rocks. There wasn't a solid piece of bone in his body. And mind you, this is like within the first 6 months of my career,
Wow. Yeah.
and it's over the course of 2 shifts. So there's a lot of other calls that go in there, but it was that call with that girl that when we got back to the station, because it was right before my relief got there, it was the call was a late call on the shift, so it was right after or right before shift change. And so both crews were there in the bay, and I asked, I'm like, it's just like last couple of shifts, seen a lot of really crazy stuff, and you guys have been doing this for like 20 years. Like, do you guys ever have nightmares, or, what do you do to like deal with those images in your head? And this guy who's very well respected, was like a special ops firefighter guy. And he's sitting at the head of the table that was, it was like the smoking table out in the bay.
Yeah.
And he just like slams his hands down on the table, pushes back away, and he's like, Jesus fucking Christ. You fucking hear this, kid? Like, I'll tell you what, you're getting off right now, right? Why don't you drive down to Home Depot, fill out an application, because clearly this isn't the job for you. And I was like, no, I mean, I'm fine. I just was, concerned about you guys. You've been doing it for so long. It's hard for me to believe that seeing this stuff day in and day out hasn't impacted you. But if you're saying that, you don't have any issues, then, I guess I won't either. And I learned a lesson that day that I should never, ever mention if something is bothering me. And 15 years after that, I was the chief of special operations, and it was all over the news. You may remember this. A car was clipped by another car, and it ended up getting knocked into oncoming traffic and swerved through that traffic, hopped a sidewalk, through a parking lot, through the front wall of this daycare center. On the other side of that front wall was 3 and 4 year olds sitting down to snack time at this little table. And beyond that little table of 3 and 4 year olds was another wall. And beyond that wall was a playroom full of 4 and 5 year olds. And the back wall was a solid concrete block wall, which is where the car came to rest with, 4 or 5, maybe 6 kids underneath it. And I was one of the first chief officers on scene and saw, just a bunch of little bodies, and it was horrific.
Yeah.
And when I left work, I went to the hospital where I knew they were taking this one little girl in particular, because she was one that I had, because at one point I had like 6 little kids that I was just getting ready to, was just getting them ready to be transported to the hospital. And I mean, at that point, it was like all hands on deck. Chief officers were doing patient care.
Yeah.
And so I went to the hospital, and the nurses were doing their job. They're like, no, we can't let you know who's here and who isn't. Just maybe one of the parents will come down. And I was like, well, that would be great if you would let them know that I was there, and I'd love to talk to them. And then there just happened to be one of the mothers of one of the children was there in the lobby and came over, and she was like, you were there? And I said, yeah. And she just started thanking me, and she told me that her son was one of the boys underneath the car, and he had a broken arm, and he was like such a tough little dude when we pulled him out from under there. And she was telling me that he would love to meet me, and it was at that point where I had kind of like let myself experience what had just happened.
Yeah.
And I broke. And that was, I think, one of the first times that I really thought to myself, man, I think I might need to get some help, because I mean, like in public, I crumpled like a little kid and was crying, and this woman like wrapped her arms around me, and I sobbed. And I was struggling after that. And a couple of lieutenants that worked under me were like expressing concern, and it's like, and here I am, I'm the chief of special operations, that it's all these type A personalities, these like the top of the food chain dudes that I'm being vulnerable to. And it was very uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable. But I look back, because I did get some help, but I don't know that I went as far as I should have, because I just ended up shoving more stuff down on top of that. And it wasn't until like 2019 that I really, really broke. And we'll see it in people that we work with when they're struggling with something, and a lot of times it's cumulative,
Right.
And I don't care what anybody says. Yeah, it might be getting better, but the stigma is still there. Nobody wants to admit that they're having some mental health issues,
Yeah.
because there's still this idea that we allow to penetrate our brain and our belief system that we're somehow less than or weak or broken if we seek help.
Yep.
But if we don't, I guarantee you that at some point, I mean, you might make it through your career without destroying it, but you might end up losing your marriage. You might end up alienating your children. You might destroy some of your really good friendships. I mean, you might not lose your career. You might be able to retire, but I mean, like, just since I've left the fire service and guys that I, looked up to that just seemed like they were 10 feet tall and bulletproof, they, I mean, some of those guys, they broke after a couple of years of being retired.
Yep.
Just off the top, 2 guys, 8 bullets, and I think, and there's all those suicides that don't get registered as suicides. I think, the ones where they drink themselves to death, or accidental overdose on painkillers, or drunk driving accident where they drive themselves into a wall.
Yeah.
There's a lot of suspicious deaths that I think are directly linked to PTSD and like not getting the help that we desperately need.
Yeah.
But that's when people start screwing up at work or start turning into assholes. Like when you start looking at yourself and like, why am I such an asshole? Well, you're probably dealing with some shit,
Yeah. It's time to reach out at that moment.
Well, I feel like had I done some good self-care early in my career and got into those good habits, maybe I wouldn't have had these mood changes and relationship issues and stuff. I don't know. It just seems like that would be a lot easier.
Yes.
To nip in the bud early on, and like we were talking before, the CISM, critical incident stress management. Like we have all these teams. Like I was one of them.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, where that came in this storyline. Was that something you did later in your career, or okay?
Yeah, it was later. I was like, I looked up to them, and I was the only chief officer that I knew of that got certified. And I did it because I knew there was other chief officers that were putting on this facade, and being all tough, but they're seeing the same shit. And ultimately, when they're on one of those big calls and they're making decisions,
yeah,
I don't think a lot of people realize that you internalize those decisions when they don't work out.
Yes.
Because it was your call ultimately. You might be taking advice from the people that are right there with their hands on, but it's your decision. And if there's a death or, an injury of one of your guys, you take it personally.
You absolutely do. Yeah. As a frontline supervisor myself on a critical incident, now there was a higher supervisor that was on there, but yeah, same thing. You are absolutely right on how the decisions we make also wear on you, especially it doesn't even always have to be negative outcomes. Sometimes it's like, well, this could have went better, or I could have, you sit there and beat yourself up with all the different ways it could have been handled.
Yeah. Yep.
You talk a little bit, Dave, about self-care, and there's a lot of conversation. In fact, I think you had John Kelly on your podcast as well, but I had a law enforcement life coach on. I had him on mine. In fact, that was the episode that released this week, even though we talked a long while ago. And this is what that entire episode was about, was this idea of self-care. So what are some of the things that you've now identified that you wish you knew early in your career? Like, what would you have done differently? And twofold, I'm assuming when you talk about those early days, because you were saying like the first 6 months of your career, you probably didn't have CISM and so forth at that time. Yeah. No. So there wasn't any kind of debriefs. There wasn't any kind of conversations around what people were feeling and experiencing, like what you were saying. So what are some of the self-care things, if you went back and talked to yourself at that time, that you would want to put into place?
Well, I would have, it's a lot easier now to get that kind of care. But back then, one of the biggest mistakes that I made was on my days off. I mean, part of the culture was going out and drinking. That was a way to put those calls in the back, push them down and just try and forget about them. The sleep issues were always pretty bad for me. And one thing that I didn't, and this is something that I'd like to talk about briefly, and I've got a thing on my website on the resources page that if people aren't familiar with the ACE study, ACE is an acronym. It stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it is there's some really, really interesting statistics. And everybody can do this as I'm talking about. So it's a scale of 0 to 10, right? Okay. And you give yourself 1 point if any of these have happened to you during your childhood. Was there any emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect? Did you witness your mother being battered? Was there a parental separation or divorce? Was there mental illness in the household? Was there substance abuse in the household? Was there an incarcerated household member? So each one of those gives you a point, and the more points you have, the more likely you are to abuse drugs or alcohol. The more likely you are to have mental illness, physical illnesses, heart disease. Obesity is another one and that's actually how the study even came about. Was this guy was researching obesity in children and started putting together this correlation between adverse childhood experiences and obesity. And
interesting.
And so what I have found and what the statistics say is that men and women both, adults today are like most likely have a score of 3 or 4.
Wow.
And a score of 4 or more, your chances of experiencing some kind of life-threatening illness or depression, the suicidality, that sort of thing, increases exponentially. And by the age of 40, you'll either be dead or in prison, essentially. And like my score is like really freaking high, and I have beat the odds. My younger brother, however, he died from an overdose in 2010. My mother died a few years after him. And my younger brother, still, the youngest of us, he came close when he was 16, actually. And so there's a lot of us in fire and law enforcement that will never ever openly talk about those experiences, because for some reason we are ashamed that we were in that environment. But it also makes us really good at our jobs.
Yes. I would agree with that.
And I believe that you can go one of two ways. And the way that I went was I wanted to help people, and I wanted to be able to be that person that somebody could depend upon. And I do believe that I was very, very good at my job, and I helped a lot of people. But having the ACE score that I do have, it also made me pretty susceptible to PTSD. The symptoms of PTSD. I mean, it kind of sets you up,
right?
When you go into a field where you're experiencing the trauma of others over and over and over again, you're setting yourself up to struggle with PTSD.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the things that I would have told my younger self, is that I had some demons that I needed to deal with, and I needed to deal with them now.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Don't you think, just real quickly on something you said there, don't you think having that strong why for helping other people is in and of itself kind of healing? I think, at least me personally, like having this podcast, having the, writing and so forth, I find in and of itself to be very therapeutic. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that is when we're real clear on our why, because I think in my experience, I don't know that I was real clear on why I was a firefighter. It wasn't until I was much older. Well, it was so when I left the fire service, I had this identity crisis. I spent 23 years in the fire service. That was my identity. I mean, I was pretty ate up with it. Like I would take vacation so I could go to training. Because how Department of Homeland Security, they have all that, what is it? Emergency response to terrorist bombings, like those kind of courses.
Yep.
And so, go out west, make little vacation out of it, and I get to do a bunch of cool shit. But I would take freaking vacation to go take these classes, and I didn't see any problem with that. Like I took time away from my family, and that's another thing where I think we bury ourselves in work and neglect the things that are really the most important. And it wasn't until I left the fire service that I felt like I lost my identity, and I really needed to dig deep and figure out what my purpose was and who I was really. The fire service was just a way for me to express my values and what was important. And it gave me the ability to take care of my family, which is what I ultimately wanted to do, but I lost sight of that at times. And I think that is very common in our line of work,
Very much so. In fact, even what you just said there with the vacation, I know myself early on, and I know a lot of officers who will use vacation to like work off duties, teach at the college, these other income producing opportunities. Because in their mind, it's double dipping, but you're not taking that time to reset, decompress, the things that we know now looking back that you've got to do.
Yeah.
Let's quickly segue into your book. You're the author of Fireproof, your grand strategy for transforming failure into fuel for the future. A little bit of a mouthful there, but I love the title and the concept. Walk us a little bit into that, because I think the book kind of, or at least part of the book, deals with some of the tragedy that you just talked about. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. The book started off as a leadership book. I started writing it shortly after the death of my brother in 2010. And it really evolved through the years, because you know as well as I do, as you develop as a leader, your views on leadership and how you manage certain things, they change. They are more refined, and so I just kept on editing this leadership book. And when I left the fire service, I went through this identity crisis, and I realized that there's so much more that should be addressed, and I didn't want it to be just another leadership book. I wanted there to be an authentic accounting of the really big mistakes that I've made in my life and how I overcame them, and just maybe give some hope to those out there that feel like they've destroyed their life through whatever stupid decisions they've made. Because, we all make stupid decisions. I think what we miss, the opportunity that we miss, is that opportunity to give ourselves some grace and identify the things that we've gotten right and done really, really well in the lives that we've impacted in some amazing ways. We tend to minimize that stuff and like over maximize the mistakes that we make.
Yeah.
And yeah, we might make some stupid decisions, but it's up to us. We can allow those mistakes to define us, or we can allow those to be opportunities to refine us. We can become better for those. And that's really what I talk about in the book. And I give some tools to help people really dig deep and figure out what their big why is early on, and set a path to where they want to be when they're done with all the running and gunning and all the cool shit that we get in to the fire service and law enforcement, all that really cool stuff. When we're done doing all of that, where do we want to be? I mean, and because 20 years after we retire, is there really going to be anybody other than like a couple of guys that we still stay in contact with that remember the cool shit that we did? Right.
Very unlikely. It is true. I've seen it even as the old timers, if you would, as they retire and so forth. Yeah, every once in a while you may tell a story or, their name comes up, but over the years, half people don't even, more than half. I mean, we're such a young agency now, probably 3/4 of the people have no idea who that name even was. And time marches on, as they say. Yeah. Something I want to quickly bring up here under the book, because it's about leadership, and I know we're getting really short on time, but you've said it 3 times so far in this podcast, so I just want to get your thoughts on it. How important is humility when we talk about leaders?
Well,
because you've used the word 3 times describing your dad. You used it 3 times in this conversation. So I really,
well, that is one of those hard lessons learned from me, because I've said it a couple of times, and I do believe that I did my job really well. I've received a lot of accolades. I've received awards for actions I took on calls, and um, been recognized quite a bit. And I've never done any of those things for recognition. But when you get recognized over and over again, that shit can go to your head. And it did for me. And it, like, really, I started doing things for the wrong reason, because I wanted to keep feeling that good. Yeah, I wanted to feel good about myself. I'm like, and it always happened when I was struggling with something, where I would really, like, maybe just not forget, because it was still there, but ignore the fact that I was doing things for the wrong reason, that the reason why I've done so well was because I was putting others first. I wanted to help other people, whether it was fellow firefighters, helping them become better, um, developing the team, uh, putting my own body at risk to help somebody else. But when you start doing things for, because you want to feel good and feel recognized, uh, that's your ego getting in the way. And when you forget about why you're doing what you're doing, the true reason is to help others. When you lose sight of that and it becomes about you, the fall is coming. And I use this phrase, and I have shirts that I put it on. It's I write it under my signature when I do book signings. It's be humble or be humbled. And I I've struggled to remember that throughout my career, and every time I forgot it, it was sure to come, and I've fallen on my face quite a few times, and it was when I forgot that it's not about me. It's about the people that I'm leading, and I like to say serving. Um, because when we're in a leadership position, I feel like the only way that we can really gauge our success as a leader is to look at the success of the people that are following us. How successful are they? Um, how much better are they for having followed us? And if they're only there because they got assigned to you, and the minute that they can go to a different team, they do. You got to start looking at who you are as a leader, um, and maybe put your ego in check, because it's not about us. And until we're adding value to those that we care about, and we really should care about the people that we're leading. Um, yeah, yeah. So I would say humility is vital.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love that. And for years before even law enforcement, I always had the Zig Ziglar quote written up on my wall and stuff, where you can have everything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. And it's the same thing. It's really that focus as others. Well, we've definitely run down on time here. Two last things. I want everyone to check out your podcast, From Embers to Excellence. Great podcast, by the way. And you have people from all walks of life on there. So I want everyone to check that out. What is next for you and your mission?
Well, I do coaching. One of the things that I really like to do is work with people that they want to be better leaders, and it doesn't have to be fire or law enforcement. I've been talking to some people in tech lately, because apparently there's it's just like in the fire and law enforcement industry. There's people that get promoted. They might be really, really good tacticians, computer engineers, really good at engineering, and that's why they get promoted.
Yep.
And now they're leading a team, but they suck. Their people skills are horrendous, and they don't want to be an asshole, so they do everybody's work for them and get burned out and they don't last.
Yep.
Or they become a tyrant and a micromanager, and nobody wants to work for anybody like that. So the team implodes. And it's real easy to fix that. It's all about mindset. So I work with people that are either in a leadership position or they're looking at that possibility and want to make sure they're ready for it. Because I don't know about you, but when I first got promoted to an officer position, I was like, holy shit, I don't know if I'm ready for this.
Anytime I've been in a leadership position, that thought comes to mind. So yeah, before any promotional process, it's like, am I really ready for this? Am I the person for this? So,
but yeah, so I do coaching, one-on-one coaching, team building, and I do speaking engagements, and so yeah, I just rolling with that. That's what's on the horizon for me.
Well, I appreciate it. This has been a great conversation. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, if you just go to my website, hollenbachleadership.com, all of my social media links are on there. You can email me from the website as well. Yeah, I'm the one that answers all my social media messages, all my emails. So it might take me a couple of days to respond, but I will be the one responding. And yeah, I'd love to hear from everybody.
Sounds good. I'll have all that linked up, including to the ACE study that's on your website here. Very fascinating. And I think it's an important part of what people need to do on self-reflection. So Dave, thank you. We could go deeper into a lot of topics today. I think we just kind of scratched surface, but I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. And, I don't know that we've got anything on the calendar yet, but your listeners might want to tune in when you come on my show.
Well, I hope we can do that, and it would be a privilege. So thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
So how was that? I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I'm sorry the intro and outro seem a little bit rushed, but the meat of the conversation, I think, will do a lot of good for a lot of people, and I hope you really enjoyed it. So like I'd said at the beginning, things should be getting a little bit closer to getting back to normal here in the next couple weeks, and by the end of January, we will be right on track with some of the changes that we've been working hard since last fall to bring to you. And I think that's all I've got for you this week. Morning roll call should be out this coming Monday, but for sure, the interview room will be out the following Thursday. And in the meantime, I'll see you out there on the blue line.